By the way, recording is in progress.
Oh. Yeah, that's it.
Uh,
Yeah, I think it was there.
Stay down.
Ruby, that's good. And we do put some stuff in the paper. We put some of that in the paper, but that was coming from everybody's seen it. Okay. You found a little, your picture. I like
Copy.
that. Where'd you get it? Albertsons. Back at Tennessee.
Did you say you're bringing lasagna?
Yeah. Oh, there's a slice in the freezer.
Hmm,
We have to have it for the dietitian for the new menus.
okay, I got that.
Oh. They stack.
Okay, are we ready?
Yes.
All right, just to let you know, and I gotta get this thing. There it goes. My camera follows me. And it's a spiffy little camera that also, I got this for my office because I do a lot of these groups, moral injury groups. And one of the things I can do in my office is if I have a whiteboard back here, I can do this and it will zoom in so that they can see, but it looks like I'm calling them a loser, you know, like I'm. So I have to explain that every time. So welcome. We're going to be talking about moral injury and what it is and two sides of it. One is the moral injury and when we experience it. And then on the other side, moral injury for the people that you care for, veterans. What is moral injury for them? How many of you are military? Okay. How is working with civilians in this kind of environment different in your experience from working with veterans in this environment?
I would say the veterans get it, the civilians don't. It's a different lifestyle and like it's a very long time ago for me, but
Mhm.
yeah, the veterans have more understanding of other veterans issues rather than the civilian veteran issues.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I'd agree. Usually there are indeed differences between how veterans experience the world and how civilians.
Yeah, how a veteran experiences the world versus how we experience the world. Let me okay.
I guess that, and I understand that to a certain extent. But like I was raised in a very, my dad was military. And then was out and all three of his brothers also too, and. One of my uncles was on Normandy Beach
Hmm,
and they were all World War II.
yeah,
And so although I wasn't in the veteran deal, I lived a veteran's world. And doctoring and caring and whatever,
Mhm.
so.
Mhm.
I don't really know how to explain that, but I seen a lot of moral damage. You know,
yeah.
my uncle was stomping on dead bodies, you
Mhm.
know, he always struggled. And so I always grew up with that great respect for a veteran. And the discipline is definitely military that we grew up with.
Yeah.
So even though we weren't in the military, we had a lot of military background.
Mhm.
My dad was in the Air Force for 27 years. I've been in federal government most of my life. Even
So you-
in Vietnam.
Yeah,
So, and my boyfriend was in the Air Force for 23 years. So I'm the Air Force brat. I've been in federal government for most of my life, so I know exactly what it's like.
Mhm.
That's why the high regard.
You guys okay over here?
Sorry, she was out a white spider on her.
Oh, a white one. You know, those white are protected species. They're endangered. Yeah.
Sorry.
That didn't look white. Now he's on the bottom of your shoe. Okay,
Brown recluse or black widow.
so now that we've taken care of that, all of the arachnophobes are all gonna be okay. Okay, so if this is different than if you were working with civilians in a care facility versus working with veterans in a care facility, what kinds of how's it gonna, what are some different things you might experience here that you wouldn't experience in a civilian care
A
facility?
lot of the PTSD issues
Okay. How do you think that would show up?
in their actions to, saying just a flashing light or, a loud noise, somebody drops something, the PTSD issues can trigger a lot of things with the veteran,
Yeah.
no matter how old they are, that,
Mhm.
you know, that, especially if they were wartime, it's a real thing for them. They can't shut it off.
Right, right. Yeah, and our ability to understand and care for someone like that. And even knowing, you know, how can I approach them in a way that makes sure. Oh yeah, we need to make sure everybody signs in too. To make sure, like being startled, something like that, how can we make sure that we're respecting that? When I'm teaching a group, for instance, of vets, if I'm standing, like if we're watching a screen or something, I'll make sure if I'm coming to the side or even behind somebody, I'll say, hey, look, I'm gonna be behind you for a minute. Are you okay with that? Just so that they're aware, I'm aware, and somehow, you know, a veteran like that doesn't like to be in a crowd like this, and if they are, wants to be facing, making sure that they've got everybody in view, right? So part of what we're gonna do is talk about what is moral injury and how can I not only care for myself when it happens, and how can I care for a veteran? I would imagine it would be safe to say that if you've been alive in the last couple of years, you've gone through some moral injury because of COVID, because of isolation, because of expectations, because of changing rules. And because of getting sick, because of possibly losing somebody that was close to you through that. And perhaps you gave it to them, or perhaps they got it from a family member, and there's some sense of guilt or responsibility or something that might go along with that. If you've worked here in the last year, you've probably gone through some moral injury because of the shutdown and because of the mystery of who did what, and we'll never know. And some people didn't show up for work, and some people did. And how do we know what happened? And how do I feel trust? And who do I talk to? And who can I trust? Who do I trust? Do I trust anybody anymore? I don't know that I do. So we experience it too. How about when you treat some patients who are acting out, and they're acting out in big ways? And when that happens, how does that affect you when you go home? And what can you stand up for and what can you not? And how do you know you have the support of a team around you that says it's not okay for them to treat you like that, and we're going to support you for that? So that's moral injury, or can be. And when you understand what a combat vet or even just a veteran goes through, and how you can understand some of the expressions that you see happening with them, and how can you be with them in that, and when is it time to back away? All right. Before we get into it, is there anything that you would like to make sure that we talk about or address in moral injury, or a question that you have coming in, or to start us off?
You know, you can be, have the own experience.
Yeah.
Secondary.
Well, years ago, like when I was 16 years old, they hired you to be you were a nurse's aide, you weren't a CNA.
Mhm.
And they didn't have, you know, like, they had Custer County Rest Home, they had Friendship Villa. I'd never even heard of it here when my father was ill or my uncle was ill or whatever. And so we had, because they took so small amount of people, we had many veterans in those areas that were being cared for in other facilities that had a lot of the problems. And back then, they didn't have the education like they have now to treat a lot of that stuff, nor understand PTSD or anything.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
because they didn't have the knowledge at the time that like we have now.
Yeah. Yeah, PTSD is a term that came up post-Vietnam because of some of the things that came out of that just weren't covered by the things that we were talking about or treating. Moral injury is one of those things that's come up recently that, like, PTSD doesn't cover some of the causes of some of the symptoms that we're seeing there, and moral injury seems to cover it better. In fact, some of the research is showing that if we treat moral injury as we treat PTSD, we can actually do more harm by doing it that way. And I'll explain a little bit of that later. So what we're going to do is, let me share this and make sure I've got this coming across. Okay. All right, so we're going to look at the role of spirituality in recovery. What is spirituality and how does it fit in? Normally in my moral injury groups, I co-teach it with a mental health provider, like a social worker or psychologists. So I do a virtual moral injury group and then also a live moral injury group in our inpatient unit in Helena for PTSD. And those are co-taught. But what is the role? What is the distinction of what a mental health provider can do and what a chaplain can do? What spirituality and all of that? We're going to look at the invisible wounds of war. Many vets will tell you that you'll talk to around here, they wish they would have had an arm or a leg blown off, because at least it would be obvious to people why they're struggling. But an invisible wound of war can't be seen. But the expression is there, the anger is there, the activation is there, the triggers are there, but people don't get it. So hopefully we can help you get it a little bit. We're going to talk about what moral injury is, spirituality and moral injury. How do we treat this? And then we've got a guy that will be coming on from Lincoln, Montana, who's been through our program, just a great guy, but has a story to tell. And I'm going to let you meet him. Okay. Have anybody seen this whole health care wheel? All right. This is something that the VA came out with a few years ago. In fact, I think Montana is one of their development states, because we're kind of a unique state, we're not even rural. Did you know that? We're frontier. That's different. It means we have more cows than people in Montana, and more square miles per person than anybody, I think, except Alaska. So anyway, I don't know what that has to do anything, but this is just basically when a person comes in for treatment at the VA, they don't just come in for medical treatment. They also come in for mental health treatment, for spiritual care treatment, and they can also do nutrition and family and marriage care, mindfulness, personal development, and things like that. So it's more of a holistic. We're helping veterans understand that just because your body is healthy doesn't mean your mind is healthy, or that your soul is healthy, and how all of those things work together. Question is, how does spirituality fit into that? You may have thought when you heard that a chaplain was coming to teach moral injury that you're coming to a Billy Graham crusade. And I don't know if you know who Billy Graham was, but it's like, is this going to be one of those kind of things? Versus what is it that a chaplain does? And military chaplains, by the way, are different from VA chaplains. I don't know if you've experienced the difference of that, but there are differences. But the first question is, what is spirituality? Because would you agree that you can be spiritual without being religious?
Yeah.
Okay. Some of you nodded vehemently on that. And I appreciate that. Did you know that the percentage of Americans who profess to be spiritual but not religious has grown from, like, within the last 10 to 15 years, from 17% to 27%. There's some shift happening in that. Do you think you can be religious without being spiritual?
Yes.
Why?
Here we go.
Briefly, because this is my time, okay?
I grew up Catholic,
Mhm.
and I'm not knocking the Catholic religion
Yeah, that's all right.
by any means. Very ritualistic. You are trained every inch of the way, and so it is a ritual that you do, and you pray. But just because you're ritualistic does not mean that you have any spirituality in you.
Okay, so you can
Just
have a
because you know how
form.
to do all the rhythm does not mean that you're spiritual.
Yeah, okay. I would agree.
I mean, does that make sense?
Any questions on that? Anybody want to add to that? Subtract from that? She's waiting.
Well, it's Catholics in here. I'm seeing
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna get off, we're gonna walk away from that. So, okay, here's the thing. Here's a definition of spirituality. Spirituality is that aspect of humanity, that part of us, that refers to the way that I see and express meaning and purpose, and the way that I experience a connectedness to God, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. Okay, so basically all that's saying is, it is our way of bringing meaning and purpose to our experiences. When you have a veteran who is angry or acting out, oftentimes it's because there's some kind of trauma that they can't connect to meaning. Their understanding, whether it's religious or just internal conscience, cannot explain an experience that they've been through. That experience may have been in the military, it may have been before the military and family or in their community, but wherever that is, if they can't explain that, it doesn't make sense to that. For instance, a veteran who was born into a home, mom and dad were drug addicts, and they sold drugs, and they had parties in their home, and he was the sex toy. This was as a young kid, preschool up to about 8 years old, when how did all these flies and insects get into here today? Squirrel. So CPS came in, Child Protective Services, and took him out of the home and put him into foster care. Guess how that went? As badly as you can imagine. Same kind of home as he came from. And he went into the military to get away from that. Guess what happened in the military? He's got MST. So as I was walking with him, doing what we call a spiritual assessment to see what his questions are and how they may contribute to why he's there and may contribute to the treatment that he wants while he's there, I asked him, so if I could arrange a meeting between you and God, because he had some form of spirituality, and you could sit down with God and ask him anything you wanted to ask him, what would you ask him? Yeah, go further. Why just the why me? As a kid, what else do you think he might ask? Yeah. I was too small, innocent, to know that this was not normal, because it's happened in my house, therefore it must be normal, or to protect myself. Well, there's a moral injury. And the difficult thing is, he had an experience where that was wrong, but it kept happening to him, so it must be a reflection on him, right? At least that's what he's going to feel. So when a traumatic event can't be explained by your understanding of meaning, for a purpose, that brings some kind of trauma and creates a stuck point. It's hard to continue to grow when you have that kind of an experience that can't be explained. You get stuck at that social or emotional level. And so it might explain why some of the people that you treat, that you care for, act like 5-year-olds. Might be a curiosity for you to say, I wonder what his or her story is. There must be a story there, right? So hopefully this will help you become more curious. And I know it is wearisome to care for this. What this is doing is maybe creating some enough empathy to ask a question or listen to a story, which, by the way, can help explain it, but doesn't excuse it. I get that. But that's where our moral injury comes in as caregivers. As you take the brunt of some of this stuff, it becomes your stuff. So how does this work? Well, the way that I explain this is that we have gauges. We have gauges that we look at, like a car. And you look at the dashboard of a car, and all those gauges tells you what's going on in the hidden part of the car. When I was a college student, my cars had basically 2 gauges on it. I could tell how fast I was going and how much gas I had. And when my speedometer broke, I called it a conscience saver. I didn't even know how fast I was going.
Oh, I got a tachometer in mine.
Well, I mean, look at all the information you can get from that. In my car, if the check engine light came on, like it did a lot, if you put electrical tape over that, that fixes that too, right? So with all these gauges tell you what's going on in the part of the car you can't see. And you better be aware of that. And if you don't address it, what's going to happen?
Okay.
It's going to quit eventually. So it would be wise to take care of that. We have gauges, and I would look at those gauges as having, like, I think we have at least 3 gauges. One is a spirit, one is a mind, and one is a body. Now, the question is, what is a spirit? So we can be spiritual without being religious. There's a distinction. The spirit is over on the left of that slide, says, I think spirituality is the need to bring meaning and purpose and hope to our experiences. What is meaning? Meaning is everyone's desire to find, is there a design and is there a designer behind this life that I'm living? Is there something bigger than me that I'm a part of? Somebody joins the military. What's the bigger purpose that they're going after, do you think? Career may be one. Discipline.
Brotherhood or something.
Yeah. Yeah. What about patriotism?
Yeah. It's drafted.
Well, hopefully there's a little of that behind it anyway, but yeah.
Protect my way of life.
Uh-huh. Yeah. That's meaning. Now, it can be bigger than that. It can be more than just a country. It can be like, was I born by a design or by a designer? I had a veteran sitting in my office last Saturday whose stepfather told him it would have been better if he hadn't been born. Because this stepfather's daughter committed suicide, and he blamed this stepbrother for it. Imagine. Moral injury for him is, I'm a mistake. And more than that, if there is a designer, I destroyed it. And so he's like, and I said, so is that true? He said, well, I had struggles and I was like, she was asking for help. And I'm like, I don't know how to help you. And so I didn't help her. So yeah, I guess so. Like, wait. I'm missing the connection. So was he. But that's what his stepdad told him, and therefore that's what he believed. If you grow up in that kind of atmosphere, then that's the message that you take. That's my design and that's my designer. Let's say somebody says, okay, I was born into a great family that taught me that I had meaning, that I was important, that I mattered. And something tragic happens to them that falls outside of that. Well, then at that point, it's like, well, do I matter? There's a high likelihood that they can be supported and recover because of a strong family system. But that's a very difficult. Trauma is one of those things that calls into question my belief system about meaning and purpose and hope. So meaning is there design? Is there a designer? Purpose is my identity. How do I contribute to the design and designer? Or do I? Let's say somebody goes into the military and they get involved in PTSD or moral injury event, and they start to think, maybe the world was a just place until I went to war and I got involved in something that was horrible. I did something, I witnessed something was done to me. Have I actually begun to fight against the design? Am I at war with the designer? Like I contributed to that? Or my concept of God was in place, and then I saw how bad people can beat each other. And if God knows about that and didn't do anything about it, I'm not interested. I don't want to be connected to that. So that's where meaning can get challenged. The greater the experience, the bigger the question. Is there a design? Is there a designer? And how am I connected to that? And hope is that growth toward that design, and that movement toward becoming a greater part of the design and the designer. Okay, so here's what we say about the difference between religion and spirituality. Spirituality is everybody's need to put meaning, purpose, and hope into my experiences. Religion is an organization to help me put meaning, purpose, and hope to my experiences. Okay? For many people, that can be helpful. Sometimes that covers the trauma, sometimes it doesn't. I had a community clergy training in Billings where we were training pastors and nonprofits and veteran support groups on how they can recognize moral injury and become a kind of a first line of defense. When a soldier comes home, they tend to want to isolate. If they've got moral injury or PTSD, they want to isolate. They don't feel like they can go back to their church, because if people knew what had happened to them, they would be evil. And so if pastors could understand what moral injury is and how civilian religion may not have prepared them for it, maybe they could help them with that. I was a pastor for 30 years. I had soldiers come back either active duty after a deployment or after retirement and never really get connected back to the church community like they were before. I had one guy who was in my church in Laurel. His wife and 2 kids were in my church all the time. In fact, I did their weddings, and then they started having kids, and we did baby dedications and all that. And these guys, in fact, his wife was there all the time. She was there more than me, and I was the pastor. So one time I was sitting down having breakfast with this guy, and I said, so tell me, what's the deal? And this guy was a Vietnam vet. And I told him, your wife's at church more than I am. I mean, and I've never seen you there. What's the deal? And he said, oh, Pastor, God could never forgive me for the things that I did and saw in Vietnam. Where was his conflict, do you suppose? Knowing what you know about Vietnam combat, why did he feel like God could never forgive? Why was his experience unforgivable?
Because he didn't forgive himself.
not?
And also. A lack of understanding. And that God forgives everything.
Which that was my original response. Like, oh, you just don't get it. I've got to say, I've been a chaplain since 2018. I was assigned to the mental health unit and the medical floors. And I have heard many stories of veterans that I'd never heard before in private hospital work. And I started hearing the stories, like you're going to hear one this afternoon. I started to think, oh, if that were me, I'd feel unforgivable. I feel like that just stepped over the line. Whatever that line is, that stepped over it. Yeah, and I got to admit, there are a lot of times when I'll have a veteran in my office or in a moral injury group or in a kind of conference, virtual conference, and they tell their story. I'm like, I can't believe we as a country send people off to do that. But that's what war is. How can war, here's a contradiction of terms, just war.
Yeah.
Bring those two together. A moral war. Now I get that branches of service have values. But it's like when we say, oh, pastors are hypocrites because they talk about one thing and then they get caught doing the very thing that they are preaching against. But think about a 17, 18-year-old who's off to the military, who from the day they were born were taught not to kill, to respect life. And then they go to basic training. And in basic are taught to kill. We, in fact, everything we started with the first 18 years of their life, we have to break down so they can become a soldier. How can that not be a moral injury? Probably the bigger question. How come some people can go through that and be okay, integrate into their civilian community, and other people just can't? So 1% go into the military, 1% of the 1% come to the VA for care. So how does that work? What's the and then I'd say, like in this kind of care, you do end of life when, if we haven't resolved it or figured it out to this point, then we've got to figure it out before we go to our legacy and leave our legacy.
You can't imagine how much, moral, but damage that was caused with the Vietnam vets. Moral injury, because where someone didn't know what they were fighting for. And then when they got back, they were treated so badly
Yeah.
that I can't imagine what kind of moral injury many of them went through.
Yeah, now not only am I not safe because of some of the things that I did, but now my country doesn't support me either.
Yeah,
Different from World War II, when it's like, hey, make the world a safer place from some crazy man who's going to take over the world,
yeah,
to going over, and a lot of them were drafted. They didn't choose to do that, and then come home to that.
I think that it might not only be just from serving in war too, just from even being in that experience, from doing training and everything, that you still go into those situations. You may not experience the exact thing, but some people still struggle because, like you said, the first 18 years they were taught one thing and then they're broken down and taught complete opposite that whole time. And then they could still have that kind of injury,
Yeah.
even if they didn't face war.
And what happens when you discharge from the military and come back home? What do they do? What do we do to prepare you to reintegrate into civilian?
They didn't do anything. It was a struggle. And when we signed up, my experience, I went into the Army in 1973, military police. Basic training was 8 weeks. AI is 8 weeks. boy, I'll tell you what, they stripped everything away from what you ever, and made you start with what they wanted you to be.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't succeed in their world without doing it that way.
That's right. Yeah, so it's a tear down and rebuild.
And it was rough.
Yeah. And now how do you tear down and rebuild to go back into civilian values, morals?
Don't they have programs now for those vets coming back into civilian life?
When I ask veterans about that, yeah, I go through this very scenario. First 18 years, your values are developed. Then you go into military, those are torn down and retrained to become a soldier, a fighter. And then you're brought back home. How do we prepare you for that? And usually I get a laugh or two, nothing. Or if they do, this is what I've heard. You go into a big room, gymnasium or something like that. Tables are all around. You have to go to each table and they'll ask you, did you experience this? Do you have any nightmares? Do you have trouble sleeping or trauma? If you say yes, they'll take you through some kind of program that will take a couple of weeks. If you say no, you get to go home. What do you choose?
You know, say no.
Be quiet and just move about.
Yeah, you go home. And oftentimes, when you go home, it doesn't show up right away. When trauma happens, the difference between your regular life and trauma is that when you come into the building here in the morning to start your shift, which is what time? What time do you start a day shift?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock, okay. So pre-dawn, before blood's flowing to the brain, right? This is before coffee, caffeine is able to, yeah. So pre-thought. So you're walking through to, you're kind of on automatic. And so you may see things happening and you kind of evaluate things, but it's just enough to get to your desk and turn the computer around and get started, right? When trauma happens, like for instance, I had a guy, he was an E8, he was a CV, he was an engineer, built roads and cities for the military in Iraq. And when they were in Iraq doing that, they would always be on the alert because you'd hear the incoming, but you never knew where they were going to land. So you're always listening for a certain tone or how close they were going to get. You always were alert for that. And one time he was in the chow line and next to the dorm and 2 missiles came in and hit the dorm he had just come out of, and a big explosion, and people started rushing out, trying to get away from it. And he dropped everything and was trying to rush in to save some people because he had some people in there himself, but he was getting run over and couldn't move, in fact, was getting wounded because people were running over him. You imagine the chaos. What happens in trauma is all of your senses go on full alert. Your taste, your touch, your hearing, your sight, your smell, everything is on hyper alert. And so you remember everything, or maybe you don't necessarily consciously remember it, but what's happening is when you come home, you may be okay for a while, but then you get a smell, a whiff of something that smells just like the burning flesh that you smelled in that attack. And all of a sudden it all comes back and the vet is like, where did that come from? I was just, triggers. I was just doing my life and all of a sudden it all came back. Well, that's because all of your senses were engaged in that. And so when one of those senses gets triggered at some point, and who knows when it's going to happen, that can take you right back to the event. You're like, I didn't know. And that's why the startle reflex in some of the vets that you deal with. And by the way, you've dealt with some vets here that aren't always nice, right? And the potential for getting that again is always there, right? So by the way, when you've experienced that and another vet does something like that, that can be a trigger. And you might say, how come I reacted like that? Where did that come from? Well, it was a traumatic event that will come back at the most inconvenient times. Thoughts on that? Am I making this stuff up?
No. Even if it's not a traumatic event, you have triggers all the time.
Sure.
It's just that it's bad when it's a traumatic event.
Yeah, we'll talk about that with moral injury. Why are some events traumatic in that they stall us from moving on? We get stuck in that emotionally or socially or in fear. Yeah, we'll get to that. Okay, so let me go into moral injury and define what this is. This is Hank Kaiser. Hank was a part of my church in Laurel and a World War II vet. He was an engineer, trained engineer. So he lived in Laurel, and so he was taught. He was engineering, piloting. What do you call it when you drive a train? You don't drive a train. You don't ride a train, huh?
Conductor,
Conductor. Okay.
engineer.
Yeah. Okay. That. Anyway, he was doing that. So when he got drafted into World War II, they found out that he was an engineer, and they had him do that. So from the time of Normandy all the way into Berlin, he was taking in troops and munitions to the front line and bringing the injured back. He was in all of them. Battle of the Bulge was the worst. And every year, the anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge was somewhere around December 16, 17, somewhere in there. He would go out to the front of his house with a lawn chair and sit out all day. Didn't matter what the weather was. That's what he felt he could do to memorialize his friends that he lost, the people that died while he lived. How come I get to live? They died. He could at least do that. He didn't talk about it, didn't tell anybody about his war experiences. He felt like that was part of his duty moving on as a soldier. Part of it was he didn't want other people, civilians, to experience what he experienced. That was just his duty. In other words, his war kept going. It never ended. Somewhere in his 70s, a switch flicked on where he couldn't not tell people his stories. And he would tell stories over and over. And it's like his wife was like, what just happened? I love this, but what happened? And finally asked him, Hank, you used to never talk about this. I appreciate you entrusting this to me. What happened? He said, I don't know. I just need people to hear me. I need them to hear the story. That's part of what you're going to get with veterans here, especially at end of life. Like there is this thing, they need you to hear their story. I get you don't have time to do it. It's actually what chaplains get paid to do, is to receive the story and help them in the direction of bringing meaning and purpose into that. But you get to be a part of that. You see physical therapists going around the hall, and guess what? They're talking with the patient and they're talking about their stories, and things are coming out, especially in the exercise and working on all of that stuff. That that's part of it. We're a team in this process. But Hank was one of these guys who realized that the wounds of war weren't just a limb that got blown off. It was something that got wounded in the soul, and it never went away. What is a wound of war? This is this book called Soul Repair that I got up here. After we send men and women off to war, how do we bring them home to peace? Not just bring them home to peace. We talk about, one of the books here talks about the 3-second war, just to give you an idea. If a person goes out to combat at 18, 19, 20 years old, usually when I get into a moral injury group, I'll ask them, how old were you in combat? Usually, if it's not an officer, it's 18, 19, 20, 21 maybe. So for a guy, the brain's not fully developed yet. When's a woman's brain fully developed? 10 years old? It's earlier than a guy. That's all I got. Yeah, somewhere around there. So when they get into combat, when the bullets start flying, it's chaos, right? So the 3-second war is the first second, identify the threat. Second, determine the plan. And the third second, carry it out. And then what? Live with that decision the rest of your life. Like, that's a big thing to go through, but then it's a bigger responsibility to carry it the rest of your life. Because the rest of your life, what you're trying to do is put some meaning to that. Did I make a good choice? Could I have saved some lives if I had made a different choice? If I would have been 6 inches to the right, I would be gone and my buddy next to me would still be living. That's a big thing to carry on the rest of your life. I'd like to give you a little bit of an experience of some veterans and what they say about moral injury on this one. Let me see.
Marines in 1967.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel John White. I'm a senior intelligence officer for the Mississippi National Guard.
Hang on.
My name is
Let me make sure this is getting shared right. And share sound, okay.
John Reitzel. I'm a U.S. Army Colonel, retired infantryman.
Robert F. Dees, Major General, U.S. Army, retired.
Kyle Radke, Air Force Captain.
Miosha Thomas, United States Navy veteran.
If you happen to stumble into the church that I pastor, I'm known as Reverend Dr. John L. McCarty.
My name is James Joyce, Sergeant Major, U.S. Army retired, 24 years active federal service.
I'm Major Micah Taylor with the 172nd Airlift Wing.
My name's Jeremy Rawls. I got out of service as a sergeant from the Army National Guard. I did 11 years total, and 4 years out of that I was active duty Marines.
My name is Jim Mukoyama. I'm a retired Army Major General.
Lieutenant Colonel Terry Dawn Neely, and I'm an AirVac flight nurse.
Dr. Donna E. King, Army.
I'm JT Cooper. I was in the 10th Mountain Division, Fort Drum, New York.
My name is Jim Reinhardt. I am a Marine. You know, I've been told I got PTSD, but I don't. I have moral injury.
I define moral injury as the impact on a person's sense of meaning and values and their basic moral foundations when they're in situations where they have to violate their core values. That can come from something they did, something they failed to do, or something they witnessed.
You're raised a certain way, and you have certain values, certain concepts that you grow up to learn and understand what is right and wrong. Now, you grow up and then you join the military. All right, you join the military, you develop a military code.
You know, when you go to basic training, the core concept is that everybody becomes the same. They shave your head, everybody gets screamed at, everybody nowhere ain't. If they could, they'd take your skin color away because everybody gets treated the same. And it's one of the first times where there really wasn't a whole lot of difference.
Yes, Gunnery Sergeant!
They're very good at breaking you down to nothing so they can build you back up.
When you go to boot camp and you go to infantry training school, they constantly drill into you that your job is to close with and kill the enemy. But killing is not I don't know, they turn it into something and make it acceptable to you. You know, they run you till you almost fall out, and then you're saying kill, kill, kill. When you come out on the other end, and you've had people running next to you, you know, to get hit, and you running and you watch them out of the corner of your eye as they fall forward and they dead before they hit the ground. And these are people that you sat around in the foxhole with, that you sang with, and you know, it ain't, there's nothing glorious or all that other stuff. None of that stuff matters anymore.
But the morality of war is always in question. The first time I actually had a human being in a peep sight, I blinked. And I thought to myself, every day of my life I've been taught that thou shalt not kill. And I'm about to end this guy's life. And I pulled the trigger. And I can tell you this, it gets easier and easier as you do it more and more. And the more you do it and the easier it gets, the worse you feel.
Moral injury is not necessarily the result of immoral actions on the battlefield. The reality is that good people often have bad outcomes. Good people who make good decisions, who make right moral decisions, sometimes experience devastating consequences.
Okay, let me give you an example of that. Because this is the way this happens in combat. The idea is that I had a veteran who was a gunner in a Humvee that they were scoping out these three guys who were working on what either they were doing some irrigation work. And this guy's a Montana guy. He knew what irrigation work looked like. Or they were planting an IED into a road. And they were on the radio to their base, and the sergeant was telling them, shoot those guys, kill those guys. And they're like, I don't know. I think they're doing irrigation work. And so they called in the sniper to come in and move in closer and scope the guys out a little bit longer. And the guy scoped him. He said, I just can't tell. I don't think it's a good shot. I don't think you should shoot. And then, so they did what they were taught to do in their training. Peel up if you have a question about it. The sergeant back on base was saying, no, shoot him, shoot him. So they peeled up, and the higher command came in, took all the information in, and said, it's not a good shot, leave him. Now, in context, just the week before, These three guys on this Humvee had been in another group that had shot a father and a son because they thought they were enemies, and turned out they weren't. And so he had another guy in his other ear shouting at him, "Don't kill him, don't kill him." 2 days later, a convoy came through, and as they passed that area, the IED those guys had planted went off. And one of the guys lost both of his legs. They triaged him and got him to Germany, where he had surgery, and he ended up dying. The sergeant told this guy, "That guy's blood is on you. If you would have followed commands and killed him, that guy would still be alive today." Was he right?
No.
I don't mean morally, but if they'd shot him, that guy would be alive. So that's what he's talking about when he says you can make a good choice and have a bad outcome. Do you see how that would follow you the rest of your life? Damn if I do, damn if I don't. Doesn't matter. I make a good choice, bad choice, don't make any choices. Because a good choice could turn out bad, a bad choice could turn out bad. That's what moral injury starts as. And by the way, that's where okay, I'm going to get this. Okay. So this is where one of the things about moral injury is that they're finding like we knew that a higher percentage of veterans were suicidal ideation or completion higher than civilian population. We knew that. We're discovering now that moral injury has a higher, when we treat a moral injury for moral injury differently from PTSD, we actually lower suicidality a lot more because we're dealing with something a lot deeper. It's not just an unsafe world, it's me that's unsafe. And if we go after that, then actually we go after this hopelessness that tends to end up in suicidality. Okay, so let's talk about what moral injury is. Moral injury occurs when I go against or suspend my conscience. You get the difference between going against or just suspending? This isn't right, but I'm going to do it because we're in combat or because my officer says so, and see how it turns out. That's suspending. Going against is just saying, screw it, it's them or me. They're going, not me. It's the guy in Vietnam who is going into a village to clear out a village and throws a grenade into a hutch to clear it out, and finds out that he's just killed a grandmother and her grandchildren. But who knew? And maybe they were enemies, and maybe they were a threat. Who knows? If I don't deal with it, as many haven't, they could die. And so we just clear the whole thing. And partly out of anger and frustration, we just kill them all. The only good one is a dead one, right? So it's that idea of just total frustration and coming out angry at everybody because they learned that hopelessness. It's clear them out or it's me. So moral injury occurs when I go against or suspend my conscience or core values of right and wrong. And again, where was that conscience developed? In war or in civilian? Yeah, it's developed in civilian. And by the way, even if you move away from your religious belief in childhood, they say that 70% of combat Vietnam vets came home and left their faith. 70%. Even if you walk away from that, you don't walk away from your conscience that easily. it stays with you. Until you identify it and maybe challenge it and then change it. That's not an easy process to do. That's part of the treatment moral injury does. So it's when I go against or suspend my conscience or core values of right and wrong, especially in an area I consider unforgivable. So we all do things that go against our conscience to some extent almost every day. To some extent. Why is this more detrimental or more traumatic? Well, combat is more traumatic. I'm killing people, right? Anybody, the first time they kill somebody, something breaks. I had a veteran tell me just that. He said, the first time I killed something, he said, Chaplain, something broke inside of me. He said, I lost something that day. And I asked him, what did you lose? He said, I lost me. I lost me, and I've never been able to find it. Some veterans will come back and say, that's my goal, is to get back to that person I was before the military. And that's never coming back. The question is, how do we integrate this new experience into this new life? That's the work of moral injury. So let's talk about the difference between PTSD and moral injury. Okay, you're going to deal with both, right? PTSD is when I go into the world, perhaps as an innocent child or even going into the military, expecting that the military is going to be one experience. And then I go and find out war is unbelievable. I don't even know what to do with it. In other words, my world is unsafe. That safety net that I thought, well, you know, the worst that can happen can't be that bad. It could be. It could be worse. It could be worse. Imagine growing up in the Ukraine or, you know, back a few years ago in Lebanon, where you were born and raised in the constant threat that your building was going to be bombed. That's just life. That's just, imagine growing up like that. Your brain gets wired to expect that. You don't feel comfortable in peace. That's PTSD. My world is unsafe. And that's why PTSD is fear-based. You're always looking for the next threat because they're everywhere. And you never know when that's going to happen. And after a while of just being hyper vigilant, your brain rewires. So even when it is safe, it doesn't feel safe. That's PTSD. My view of the world gets changed. Moral injury is different. Moral injury is guilt and shame based because while PTSD says my world is unsafe, when I do something that goes against my moral values, now guess what's unsafe? It's not just my world, it's me. I'm unsafe. I can't rely on me. Just because I believe something or value things doesn't mean I'm going to carry it out. Now that person thinks that they're a worthless piece of you know what, because of what they did. That's why that Vietnam vet who said, oh, God could never forgive me for the things that I did and saw in Vietnam. He said, if I walked into your church building, the roof would cave in. He actually did once for his grandson being in a Christmas program. And I found out that he was there and I couldn't find him anywhere. Went downstairs. He was hiding behind a coffee cup. It's a thing. It can happen. He got a cup of coffee and leaned against a wall and he was literally shaking. Can you imagine living in that guilt? That kind of guilt. And when I congratulated him for the courage it took to be there, he started to cry because he didn't want, this is the only reason he was there was for his grandson, in spite of himself, at cost of himself. So moral injury is my response to events that make me unsafe, make me unreliable. So the view, the hope I had in myself is gone. And that's why it's guilt based. There are some things, you're going to see some symptoms in your veterans that could be PTSD based, or they could be moral injury based. Some of these symptoms are shared between them, but some are unique. Okay, so PTSD, because it's fear based, can have a startle reflex, memory loss, fear, flashbacks, hypervigilance. Moral injury, because it's guilt and shame based, has a lot of sorrow, a lot of grief, a lot of regret and shame, and alienation or isolation. Now, there's some things that are shared, like anger, depression, anxiety, insomnia, nightmares, self-medication. But on one side, there's an intense fear response, while on the other side, there's I'm a worthless piece of shit, I just don't matter response. And because of that, if they sense you're getting close to them, or you're possibly even a little bit trustworthy, guess what they might do?
Pull back.
Yeah. How?
Cut you off.
Yeah. How?
They might be mean to you.
Yep.
You get ready, yeah.
Yep.
You got too close to the
Mhm.
situation.
Yeah. Whoa.
You
Get
got-
away.
You got somewhere I don't want you to be.
Yeah. How'd you step into that? I'm not letting you go there, because if you go there, I'll hurt you. And I may hurt you with anger, or I may hurt you in my response, and you don't deserve it. So I'm protecting you from me. Now, what if that person gets into an intimate relationship? What's going to happen, do you think? What might happen?
Self-destruction.
How does that look?
Ugly.
It does. What do we do when we think somebody's getting close to me, but if they knew me, they would disrespect me, they wouldn't respect me anymore? So how do we react to that? Self-sabotage? Because if you find out about me, you'll do this anyway, so let's just get it over with. I'll be mean. So you get to experience me a little bit ahead of time, and we just avoid the whole disappointment thing. And you can call me, mean and insensitive and an angry person, and that's okay. You just protected yourself from a lot of deeper hurt. Right? So if you see this is one of the things that I think, again, it doesn't excuse it, but it might help you understand it, explain it. There in moral injury, there are three kinds of moral injury. One is something that I do that goes against my conscience or my values, something that I do. I'm to blame. And it's unforgivable in my mind, something that I do. Second is something that I witness, and I didn't stop it, or I couldn't stop it. A third thing is something that was done to me, a betrayal by an officer, someone higher than me, or someone who had authority or respect or trust from me, and I couldn't or didn't stop it. And this is where sexual trauma comes in. This is where some order from higher up that's just wrong, and I do it because that's what I'm trained to do. And I suspend my own conscience for the order. Veteran comes back from the military, from combat, and reads about somebody who's on trial for going to the electric chair for murder. And the question is, how can the guy do that? And what's the right punishment? And somebody comes back from combat who's killed a lot of people and says, one person? And that's the evil person? I've killed a lot more than that. How do I fit into this kind of civilian life? How is that possible? So that's the person who has this guilt about things that they did. And it's not just the moral injury typically doesn't necessarily happen because I killed somebody who was a combatant on the other side. It's that I killed a non-combatant, somebody who women or children or people who weren't in the uniform. But I had to clear everybody out because they were a threat. Like those people working on an irrigation ditch were actually not. How do you know? How do you ever know? So something that I did, I perpetuated it. Something that I witnessed and didn't do anything about. A lot of combat is that. Or something that was done to me and I didn't or couldn't stop it. I've had a lot of veterans talk too much force. So when they bring prisoners after a combat, after an engagement, and they're kicking them and they're trying to get information from them, or they're just taking them in, and their frustration is so much that they just beat the hell out of them. And they look back on it in the middle of it, that's what you did because of the frustration of that guy just killed my buddy or just wounded my buddy who flew back in the helicopter. I don't know how they are. That's something that that's something that I did, but it was out of the combat experience. Okay. A betrayal of right by someone who holds legitimate authority in a high stakes situation. So in other words, this is something that given to me. Hey, Chuck.
Hey, Chuck.
Hey, I'm going to mute you just for a little bit, okay?
Okay.
I'll get to you in just a second. Okay, so it's a betrayal of what's right by someone who holds legitimate authority in a high stakes situation. All right. It's harm caused by perpetuating, failing to prevent, witnessing, or learning about actions that violate deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. Okay, so think about this. Where do my values come from? Where does my conscience get built? Typically, initially it's by parents. And then as I grow from infancy into childhood, the influence comes from my friends, my community, my teachers, my coaches, religion. And then I go in the military. All that has to be deconstructed and a new value system reconstructed. And then I go into hell, which is combat. And then come back into civilian life and try to integrate those two value systems. Okay. That's the struggle of moral injury. All right. Here's what I'd like to do. And Chuck, I'm going to give them a little introduction of your story. So some of it, I think if we do this, give them a little backdrop. We'll start with that. Let me, I'm a little confused in what I've got up here on the screen, so hold on just a second. Okay. Here, Chuck, I just put you on the screen. So this is Chuck Tice. Tice or Tice?
Can you unmute him?
Tice.
Tice. All right. Hold on a second. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me, Chuck?
Yes.
Okay. So, Chuck, tell them about what branch you were in and what you did.
I was in the Navy. I was an operations specialist. We ran the Combat Information Center on the ship, a guided missile cruiser.
Okay. Now you were, let's see, you were assigned to the Persian Gulf, right?
Yeah, we were the anti-air warfare supervisor in the Persian Gulf.
Okay, so basically I'm putting a map up here. And you did a lot, you talked about the Straits of Hormuz, I mean, right at the very, the narrow part going into the Gulf. And what were you guys assigned there to do?
We were escorting Kuwaiti tankers through the Straits of Hormuz, through the Persian Gulf, and into Kuwait and Iraq.
Okay.
And back out again.
All right. And this was mainly, was this our engagement with Iraq, or?
This was during the Iran-Iraq war, and we were arming Iraq, and they were using Kuwaiti tankers and merchant ships to do it, and the Iranians knew it, and they were attacking. They call it the tanker wars. The Iranians were attacking everything, sinking all kinds of stuff in the Straits of Hormuz.
Yeah, and there was what was disclosed and what wasn't. So we said it was we're protecting the oil coming in and out, and there was also some other arms going in and out. And I'm going to, I think what I'd like to do, if I can, is give them and I'll let you hear it too, but I'm going to show a little summary of an interview with a guy who talks a little bit about that engagement, just to give them. And I'm going to ask you some questions after this, but I also realize some of the things this guy says has been redacted. Okay, so I know that just from talking to you, Chuck, and you know that. So we're not going to worry about what part of this is correct and all. So we'll get to that in a second. Let me share this, and then I'll show this to them real quickly.
It was a tragedy. We did shoot down an airliner. One of those things I'm still in disbelief that it could have happened. The mood in the Gulf was very tense. Iran, Iraq were in the middle of a war at the time, and the U.S. Navy was protecting the oil tankers that came out of Kuwait to make sure the flow of oil kept coming to the United States. And the Iranians were harassing those ships. The boghammer speedboats that the Iranians were using, they would round robin the ships while they're shooting it, trying to catch it on fire. So our job was just kind of like a police force, if you will.
We come back this way. See, there's water.
The team I was with was Combat Camera Group. I'm videotaping the whole time. And I caught a ride with the USS Vincennes, an Aegis cruiser. It's a $1 billion boat, state of the art at the time. As we were sailing back to Bahrain, we got into battle with Iranian speedboats. During a gunboat battle, we were thinking that they're going to come at us with whatever they have now. A Stark, an Exocet missile that was launched by Iraq. We were always reminded, just remember the Stark, remember the Stark. Meaning, keep your guard up because you might get killed. That was always in the back of your mind. And about 5 minutes went by, and they said there was a target that had left Bandar Abbas, the Iranian airfield. And their military airport and their civilian airport, to my knowledge, is the same place. So the aircraft, when it took off, was identified as air hostile. They thought it was the Iranian Air Force, F-14 Tomcat, but the plane in reality was Flight 655. It was an airliner, an Airbus.
5 times a week, there's a scheduled service from Bandar Abbas across the strait to Dubai. They travel flight path Amber 59.
But here the crew is, waiting for another target to come at them, and the aircraft takes off. And I believe that one of the lieutenants, I went up and asked him, I said, what are we doing? He goes, you're gonna see some missile action. And I went to the operations specialist who was watching the scope, and he's watching the missiles because he can track it off the radar, and then he sees it hit the target. But they found out like 15, 20 minutes later that there was an airliner missing.
An Iranian Airbus is presumed crashed. Please look for survivors or aircraft wreckage.
And so that's when it was like, what? Airliner missing? We didn't shoot an airliner, we shot a Tomcat, I thought. There was a lot of soul searching, disbelief. That's not supposed to happen. That's not what we were here to do. 290 civilians passed away on Flight 655, and of those 290, 66 were children. Felt so bad for the families that lost their loved ones, and sometimes you're part of history and you love it, and sometimes you're part of history and you hate it. This is just one of those things where I just wish it didn't happen, but I was there.
Chuck, what does that do to you when you see that?
It's not easy.
Yeah. And that was what, 34 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember you coming in and one of the things that you said to me was, I'm going to hell. I know I'm going to hell, but I'm just trying to make some sense out of the life that I've got left, whatever that is. And it kind of, that was the beginning of it. How were you dealing with the guilt of that experience?
Just with alcohol. Just alcohol and I wasn't dealing with it at all. I just eating myself up.
Yeah. There's I mean, tell a little bit about the impact of the crew. I mean, that wasn't just this isolated situation that Chuck has a difficult time with. The whole crew had a difficult time. Tell me a little bit about that.
The film that's been released, they had, that guy was on there. There was at least 2 camera crews on there, and they didn't. So just very edited stuff. We as soon as we knew that it was a commercial airliner, we did everything by the book. We followed protocol to the letter. We went in to look for survivors and other things, and we were elated 15 minutes before. We sank 5 of those gunboats, and to go from thinking that you're a hero to seeing just the most carnage, to seeing what, it's just what you did.
Yeah.
It was a lot of those bodies were were smoking. They were floating in the water and smoking. You know, there's like none, like all their clothes were off. It was the most horrible, gruesome thing you can imagine.
Yeah.
The ultimate rush, the ultimate high, you know, invincible combat hero. I got medals coming to that.
Yeah. You mentioned too that the skipper was looking for medals too, looking for getting into engagements that would produce that, perhaps a little sloppy because of that, but then what that did to you the rest of your life. So in a way, we've been talking about moral injury, and moral injury, one of the things is betrayal from another, like suspending your conscience because somebody else orders you into a situation that you're like, well, I trust him because he's the officer, he's the commander. I'm going to do what I was trained to do and follow that. And then it seemed to be working as the engagement started. Then when that happened, can you tell us a little bit about that? I remember you and I sitting down after your baptism, which we'll talk about in a minute, but we sat down and you took me through those YouTube videos and were kind of explaining what was going on with the crew. And then one of the things I remember you saying was, okay, you can see our faces begin to change as we started to realize what had happened. Can you describe that for us?
Well, kind of like I just said, I don't, there's no describing it. Even before we got into the wreckage, it was the longest 10 or 15 minutes in my life.
Yeah.
There was no way that I could accept it. We got down a commercial area. I was real busy during the engagement. I was the surface radar controller. I was tracking and targeting the gunboats. But we knew we were right in the middle of the flight corridor for civilian and military aircraft. And there was a lieutenant who was behind me who spoke up and said, when we tried to pull the trigger on that jet several times, over a dozen times before it actually happened. There was a lieutenant commander who was actually pushing the button, and he couldn't get it right. There's a sequence, and he couldn't get it right, and a petty officer reached over and to his console and actually fired it for him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of us, everybody wasn't sure that it was an F-14.
You kind of knew.
You
kind of knew. So when it happened, you suspected a big mistake had just been made. Between that time and when it was confirmed, what was going on in you?
I was mortified.
Yeah.
I was just a second before that. I was never been so excited. You know, yeah. I'd never been so excited. There's nothing to, you know, if anybody's honored combat vets, you know, there's nothing more. You can't put that in a bottle. You can't get that in a pill. There's nothing like combat. There's nothing like being shot at and shooting and winning.
You're talking about in a positive way. Like, it's exciting. It's exhilarating. Yeah. It's peak performance.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you
time
went
slows
from that.
down. Everything that you do is, everything's more crystal clear. You never performed that well in your life.
Yeah.
Every motion has a meaning,
Yeah.
you know.
So Chuck, besides just the act of, or being able to see the consequence of the missiles that came from your ship through your combat team and what it had done, beyond that, obviously that's the injury of the whole thing. But the process that got you there is the thing that you probably replay the rest of your life. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah.
What could you have done to change that? Do you ever
There's
think
nothing.
about that?
It could have changed the airline.
Yeah, how that turned out. Like, could you have done, do you ever think about what you might have been able to do that might have changed that?
Yeah, oh yeah, a million times. I used to. I don't anymore. There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually,
So,
you know.
On your trip home, tell us a little bit about the trip home and what that was like.
We immediately got kicked out of the Persian Gulf. They wanted our ship out of there. The whole world went crazy. So we got out and went west towards Africa, and ended up at the Seychelles Islands, and we stayed there for a couple of weeks. And
It was the only port that would let you in, right?
yeah, we were gonna go to Kenya, and we couldn't get permission to go into Kenya, so we ended up at Seychelles Islands. Nobody's probably ever heard of it. It's a little tiny island between Madagascar and like the coast of Kenya.
Yeah.
Something like that. So stayed there for a couple of weeks, and they didn't want us to come home either. They didn't want us in the Persian Gulf, and they didn't want us to come home. So we just started going places. We went to Thailand, we went to Singapore, we went to Philippines, we went to oh man, we went everywhere. We went all over the
Except home.
Yeah, we stayed.
Well, I was going to say, when you got home, tell us a little bit about what happened there.
We got home, and we got a pretty good welcome when we got home, but there was a lot of threats from places all over the world against my skipper and our ship and all kinds of stuff. So it was a little different homecoming. We were home for a couple months, and I was actually in court on the base. One day I had a crack in my windshield. If you park on the base, they got guys with nothing else to do but walk around and make sure your sticker's good, and check if you got a crack in a window or something, you're getting a ticket. And when you get a ticket in the military, you don't get to send in a fine or something. And the ticket, the military's different. The ticket means be here on this date with evidence that it's been fixed. So I was standing in court, and they came and got me and told me that I had to get back to my ship. That there was an attack, is all they said, or something like that. I got back to the ship and found out that there was an assassination attempt on my skipper, on the CO, and they put a bomb in his car, and it exploded on a street in San Diego, in La Jolla, California. Nobody was hurt. His wife was driving his car, and she heard the noise and got out.
Yeah. You said the struggle of your shipmates afterwards is pretty high. Can you say something about that?
Everybody was, yes, everybody had. It messes with your mind, everybody was just in shock.
Yeah.
you know.
There's a suicide rate of people in your ship.
There's probably like 8% of the guy. There's a list online on our Facebook group. Yeah.
Oh, really? Did you say 35?
Yeah, 35 guys have yeah, they keep doing every year, a couple guys. I don't even get it.
Yeah.
You know, it started right away. It's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, 34 years. So Chuck, when you think about your guilt and shame for that, and you started by drinking, and that got you to a place where it just about killed you. You came in for treatment. That's where we met and started talking a little bit about your religious background. You wanted to do we haven't really talked as a group here yet about how we treat moral injury. And one of the things about that is to go after the guilt, where the conscience comes from. And when an event happens that we can't explain or we can't justify, like I imagine you spent a lot of time trying to figure out how you might be blameless on this and give it to somebody else, but ultimately that didn't work, I'm guessing. That fair?
Yes, fair.
So, and then dealing with your guilt, tell us a little bit about that process of growing guilt, and then how you went into finding forgiveness or relief for that. How did that work for you?
When the internet first came around back in the 90s or whatever, the early 90s, I got on there and I found a forum where survivors of the victims they are all sharing on this forum, and I went on there and told them who I was. And
you mean the Iranians?
The Iranians, yeah, a group in Iran, and I went on there and told them how sorry I was, and tried to this big heartfelt thing I poured out, and I expect those people are not like us. They're not like us, man. They were like, we got your IP. I didn't even know what an IP address was. They were like, we got your IP address. Yeah, not good, man.
They're going to track you down.
Yeah, I decided I wasn't going to find any forgiveness from anybody on this earth that mattered.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your mom wraps her arms around you and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, baby." You know, that's not helpful. You know?
What became helpful for you, Chuck?
God.
How'd that work for you? Because that's going back to.
It works real good now.
Yeah, but it took a while.
It took a long time. I thought I was rotten. I thought I was I wanted to be a soldier. I wanted to go into combat. My dad's a combat vet. Was a combat vet. My oldest brother was a combat vet. You know, my uncle was in World War II. I wanted that.
Yeah.
Wanted it more than anything. I know it's sick, but I was excited. I was happy when we were sinking them gunboats. We were, you know, I was doing my job.
Yeah. I hear you say you tried to forgive yourself and that didn't work. You tried to go to the victims and get forgiveness from them. That didn't work. You went back to your conscience, your faith, and there were some things to deal with that weren't all that helpful. Right? Like the manipulation and the guilt that your mom had for you.
Yeah, my mother controlled. There was three boys. I got two brothers, one now, and And my mother controlled us by guilt. We were rowdy boys. We were all military bound and you know, yeah, that's how she controlled us. She controlled us by guilt.
Yeah, yeah. So when you went through this and you would go back to your faith and we would read some of the scriptures together, you would find a lot of guilt from that.
Yeah.
Right? It sounded like your mom.
Yeah.
And we started working on looking at that differently and listening to your dad's voice a little bit. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Every, you know, everything that made me feel guilt about everything, I could always hear my mother's voice in, you know,
Yeah.
because that's how she was, very manipulative and make you feel guilty. And my dad was the exact opposite. If you get in trouble or screw up or whatever, and she was hollering about something, he'd always pull you aside and give you $10 or something and tell you that, you know, my dad was so cool about everything, you know, next time don't get caught, you know, I ain't got a muffler on it, shut it off and roll it in, you know, come on with midnight, whatever. But,
so you had two competing voices going on, and it sounds like after this event, the guilt voice was winning.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I remember going through this process, and this was before we were actually doing moral injury groups, and we were talking about where your conscience came from and going back to your faith. And then I don't know if you remember we did a ceremony on Good Friday. Do you remember that?
A ceremony on what?
Well, when you got baptized.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so for you, the idea of going back to your faith and going to forgiveness was then kind of sealed with the ceremony that you would start to look at that event rather than being identified by that war event.
Exactly.
But that didn't turn everything around right away, did it?
No.
Yeah.
No, I'll go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that was the beginning, not the end. Like that's not the point of healing, but that was the beginning of where healing started.
Yeah.
Chuck is now, just to give you guys some background, has cancer, and it's stage 4, right?
Yeah.
And at this point in life where he's trying to Chuck, this is an ongoing thing, and this is part of it. And part of Chuck, we got a room full of healthcare providers in Miles City who take care of veterans at the end stage of life. And one thing that Chuck and we went on a ride out in Lincoln to the mountains last Saturday before.
Yeah.
Before this bad weather came in. And one of the things he said is, I want to end life well. I haven't done many things well. I want to end life well. And that is the ongoing thing when you go through a traumatic event like this, to have people around you who believe in you when you don't believe in you is a gift. And at some point, you might even believe that. And for you, it's been, God believes in you. That's how you grew up. You've had to come back to that. You've had some veterans who believe in you more than you do. You've reached out to veterans and provided some of that care that you wish you had. And all that's been part of, can you close that door? All that's been part of your healing, your recovery. If, Chuck, I'll give you the floor. And I'm gonna give you guys a chance to ask any questions if you want to, but Chuck, these are people who care a lot for veterans, literally. I mean, that's what they live. That's what they do vocationally. And some of them are moral injury survivors, the veterans they care for. What would you say to them that would be your encouragement for them as a veteran, combat veteran, surviving and even growing through moral injury? What would you want to say to them?
I never found one thing that worked. The one thing is God, but it's not simple. It's not easy. It wasn't easy for me. I still have moments, but things happen that ain't right. Things happen that are so wrong. They're so wrong to innocent people that have done nothing, and the forgiveness has to come from something. I'm dying, and there's no person on earth that can help me through that can explain anything to me. Nobody can tell you anything about it because nobody has ever done it before. And so the only hope, you gotta have some kind of expectation and hope for the other side, and that's all I have. That's all I have. And if I believe that he can forgive anybody for anything, then he can forgive everybody for everything.
Yeah.
And that just gives me strength every day. I don't wake up in the morning and hope that I have a good day or hope that there's no pain or anything like that. It gets worse every day instead of better. So I just wake up every day. I'm thankful for the snow. I'm thankful that it's 5 degrees. I'm thankful that I'm alive to see it. And I'm not gonna. I probably caused my cancer. Probably ate myself from the inside out with grief and guilt. And man, I'm never.
It's hard to know, isn't it?
And I'm never gonna spend another minute doing it again. I'm thankful for absolutely everything.
Yeah.
I know I'm forgiven, and I know I'm a good man.
Big words.
Yeah.
Anybody here have any questions for Chuck? Comments?
Mostly thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah. Did you hear that?
What's that?
She said, thank you for sharing.
Oh,
because that's courage. And vulnerability. I mean, having that kind of guilt and then sharing your story with a room full of people. It's like, so that's one of the things you told me, Chuck, was if I can do anything to help people before I go, that's, help me find those opportunities. So.
And I got to talk about God. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Give me a blessing.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions for Chuck? Yeah.
I'm sure it's probably hard for you to pinpoint, but you shared that you were drinking. What changed? What changed in your mindset, or who did you talk to, or what revelation did you have, or what changed where you knew you wanted to move through this trauma, move through the pain to a different, hopefully, or happier, better life?
I knew I needed to stop drinking. First off, I went for 25 years without even knowing there was such a thing as a vet center. I ended up at a vet center and ended up at the VA hospital, and Chaplain Tim's been helping me for 3 years or 4 years or something now. But it was hard. I knew I wanted to, but it's hard to put that bottle down. When this first happened to me, and there's nobody you can talk to about it, and we got to Seychelles Island, and I got a jug, and I swallowed that liquor, and I got all warm inside, and all happy on the beach and I went to that forever until I don't know. I think maybe it took till I found out that I had cancer. I think it was when I found out I had cancer, because I'm about to walk into the door of something all brand new, and I better be living like I'm there already. And I'm not gonna like it when I get there. I just knew that I had to change everything from the inside out. Prepare for what's coming.
That was 30 years later after the event.
Yeah.
It's a long holdout.
Yeah.
You struggle with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, imagine, like you say, you just wonder if all that guilt and anxiety and stuff going on in the inside isn't what caused the cancer. I'm not sure if that's possible, but I sure can understand how you might wonder.
Yeah. I like to make myself feel guilty about things.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that doesn't go away either, does it? I mean, that's
No, you just automatically blame yourself for everything.
Yeah, yeah. But Chuck, if I can just say, you're one of my heroes, because the courage it takes to go after your stuff to the extent that you have, and then to be honest and vulnerable with others, that like you said, what was that? If God can forgive anything, he can forgive everything, and that's been your experience, like that's hope. That's hope.
Yeah.
And to move. I think that's why we're all here, is with the hope that maybe we can be a part of somebody's finding hope.
Forgiveness is huge. You got to forgive everybody else too. Grudges. You got to forgive everybody else.
Yeah, but you can't give what you don't have, right? So forgiveness starts inside, and it grows as we give it out.
Yeah, I think you're forgiven when you've forgiven everybody for everything in this life. You can know you're forgiven.
Good. All right, Chuck, I'm going to let you go, and we're going to wrap it up here, but thanks again for bearing your soul for us.
Thanks, chap.
Yeah, and for doing what you did for us. You allowed yourself into a situation that wounded your conscience, so ours wouldn't have to be. And that's why we're here.
It was my honor.
That's heavy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. See ya. So let me just kind of wrap up how we go after moral injury. Our job at the VA is not to give a one size fits all. So we start in moral injury we have a 3-step process in our treatment approach. And the first step is where they draw their soul as a cracked glass bowl. When you look at yourself in the mirror, how do you see yourself? And we've done this at Clay Arts. We've also done this in drawing, where they draw the cracks and where those cracks came from, maybe from childhood, the military event, post-military events. How do you see yourself? Where's the damage? What does it look like if you put it into that? And then the second step is we talk about the circle of responsibility. What is the moral injury event that most troubles you? It wakes you up at night. You have nightmares about. It's the thing that you feel guilt and shame over. What is that? And we define that. How much responsibility are you giving yourself for that? And you remember him saying, it's easy to feel guilty. Guilt's the easy part. The forgiveness is the hard part. And the hardest person to forgive is yourself. So once we go over to the circle of responsibility, one of the things that veterans struggle with is this idea that what if, are you trying to tell me that it's not as bad as I think it is? Don't tell me it's not as bad as I think it is. Imagine trying to tell Chuck, hey, Chuck, it's not all your fault. You were involved in an engagement, so it's somebody else's fault. It's not your fault. You're okay. That doesn't work. I've tried it. In fact, That's what PTSD does, and it's effective on the PTSD side because it's a broken world we're a part of. But when we're talking about a broken person, we're talking about something else. So then the last step is this project that basically goes back to a person's conscience and belief system that where they go to for forgiveness. And so we've seen people use Native American tradition, Buddhism, Christianity, like you heard with Chuck, whatever their faith system growing up, if that's the faith system that they want to go to. Because quite honestly, if their faith system doesn't explain the trauma they've experienced, they're not going to find forgiveness in there, ultimately. What Chuck's had to do is examine his faith system more deeply, and it's just not the easy answers that he got growing up. And one of the things he and I have talked about is that this part of our scripture says, when I was a child, I used to think like a child and act like a child and speak like a child. But now that I'm a man, I've put away childish things. There's a faith that has to grow as you grow. And if your body grows and your experiences become more complex, your faith has to grow. It has to. And so the last step of moral injury is where we do like this reach worksheet. And it's basically, how do I give myself, where does my compassion and forgiveness come from? And this is the responsibility I've taken, but this is the truth that I'm going to claim. From this day on, I'm going to claim this belief system. I had a veteran who said, he was raised in one of these homes where his dad told him he's a worthless piece of shit. He'll never amount to anything. By the way, I think men get trained in that somewhere because I hear it a lot, like dads who tell their kids that. I don't know where that comes from. It's so stupid, but anyway. And he said what he did was he began by saying he was going to every day look himself in a mirror and remember that he's not the person he was told he was growing up, but that he was going to become this new person that his faith told him he was. He was going to pick a new dad, a new story, a new message, do that every day. And that's what Chuck's done, something very similar to that. So this process of getting better is a process, and it's hard work. And Chuck and I have been working on it for 4 years now. And man, it's the best. It's the best, but it's work. But these are the people we work with. And they're not, Chuck is not a hero in his own terms. He's not a hero. He doesn't feel like one. But when I see this courage of going after his story, he's a hero to me. He's the kind of guy I hope I can walk with in their story every day. All right. That's moral injury. It's how you guys can be involved in it and get to be a part of it. And that's why I think part of what we do is working with veterans is a little bit higher mission than the private sector. For me, it has been. And even for me, it's been better than being a pastor of a church. A little more powerful, but real. Any questions? Comments? Can I just ask you what the biggest message is that you got from this that you feel like is your biggest takeaway?
Well, for me, it's the difference. I've never heard of moral injury. It's the difference from the learning experience from the PTSD to the moral injury makes sense with what my son's going through.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It shines some light on some stuff that, you know, as a mom, you question.
Yeah.
What's the worst thing you can say to one of these people?
It's not that bad. I can't reduce their sense of responsibility.
And the best thing?
You are forgivable.
I think even thank you for sharing. Thank you
Yeah.
for your time. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for trusting me with your words, sharing your stories.
Yeah. Veterans will say that civilians don't care. They don't want to hear their story because they don't know what to do with that. It's outside of their,
Well, they can't relate.
yeah, yeah. And so they don't take time. When you do either of those, show either of those, it's a big deal.
Just how important access is, just the idea that you never just had access to a vet center.
Yeah.
When I think about it,
Yeah.
like, CLC, it's just like, people have to know that we're here and we're.
Mhm. Yeah, how'd he miss that? I mean, he's in San Diego and
Most of the elderly, like World War II and stuff that I've been around, they don't want to talk about it. My father would not talk about it. His brothers didn't talk about it, but what the three of them would talk about was their younger brother being on Normandy Beach. And how bad that was for him and how much better that they had it. And I have a good friend that's 81. He said, that was my duty. I have no right to talk about it. You know, he doesn't.
Yeah, part of my ongoing responsibility is to carry that. I wouldn't want you to be burdened with my experience, because I wouldn't want to take you where I am.
So most of the older ones that I've been around, they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, we had a veteran here that would get upset at other veterans for being outspoken about it because they don't believe they either went through that or they didn't, want to talk about their experience. They don't want them to talk about it because they didn't see combat or whatever. Like that's an ongoing conflict in here. We have people that have different experiences.
Yeah.
One is sharing it and one doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So you have to be conscious of that and try to help figure that.
Mhm.
We keep this one through, we keep this one to keep that at bay.
Well, you can't. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, but yeah, there's some conflict with a vet here and a vet not here. But that idea, yeah, when is it time and who decides what I need to share? That's the thing, if that's helpful for him to share that, share it. If that's not helpful for you to share, don't tell him what to do. You don't share it. I think we give that permission and shut it down too. Like, don't try to stop that person.
I know somebody tried to ask Chuck what was the determination that made him decide he needed to, seek help. Like, what would you say you see as like the forefront of that? Like, what's the number one thing that brings them to this, like trying to work through their moral injury?
It's a good question, because I ask it in every spiritual assessment. What made you decide now was the time for help? And typically, here's the thing in suicidality, it's the feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. But somebody was just telling me this last week, but it's hard to kill yourself because you don't really want to die. So there's something inside that says, I don't think there's any hope, but maybe there is. And if they know that there is help available, then that's when they reach out to it. So that would be what I would say is this little spark of hope. There might be help. I don't have any idea what that looks like, but there might be.
That's what happens in our situation, but when in hope theory, that's where having them have autonomy, have a choice over their day. When do they want to eat? When do they want to take shower? Just the littlest things can decrease that hopelessness.
Yeah.
I have control of my environment. At least what I choose to do and think at this moment in time.
And what is VA Montana doing about getting that information out to our veterans that there is help?
Yeah.
Question, sorry.
No, that's a really good question. I've been thinking about, like, I've looked at some of the stats of our growth, of where we anticipate growth, and it's pretty minor. It's not negative, but it's close. And my question is, well, so how do we get the word out that there is help out there? How do we do a little marketing? Because we're not good at marketing here at the VA. So yeah, I think like families, when families come in, that's a good time to talk to them about that. You guys are a good advertisement, frankly. The work that you do here says, I didn't know the VA could be such a positive thing. So, yeah, I think this is, you guys are a good promotion for that. But, going to a place like Lincoln, you ever seen these enclaves of vets? Like there's some areas in Montana where civilians are not welcome. And there's a high rate of gun ownership. And they're aimed at you. So, and I don't know that they know that it doesn't have to be that way, but yeah, I don't.
One takeaway for me was semi-encouraging as a civilian that really stood out to me was how universal and how human, though the experience of trauma is unique and is specialized. It's interesting the theme. You'll hear if you've ever volunteered at a homeless shelter or dealt with other high ACE scored individuals who are kind of struggling with receiving care and being in that position to choose vulnerability, maybe choosing hope, that it's almost a go-to of you don't really want to hear. It's almost like a for lack of a better term, almost like a childish statement to see if you'll budge.
One of those things
as your caregiver. If I push you away, are you going to go away? You don't really want to hear this, and you wouldn't understand. So I don't even know what you're doing here. And I think that's kind of just a way, a very human way to kind of test the bounds of the caregiver relationship. So I don't know, there's something about that universal quality of kind of that language that it's almost it's treatable. So that's hopeful. It's not aren't these like esoteric keys to turn simply because of the unique and specialized trauma, though that needs to be worked with and figured out.
Yeah.
And learned about and acknowledged and witnessed. But man, what Chuck said, that could there's a reason why it kind of spoke to each one of us, veteran and civilians alike. So I don't know if that just stood out to me.
By the way,
screen for moral injury now?
What's that?
Do they screen for it?
There are assessments. In fact, it's moral injury is becoming more and more evidence-based because in fact, I'm connected to the Dynamic Diffusion Network, which is by the way, if you need to go, we're past time, so feel free to do it. This is an ongoing discussion. But they have assessments. There's 2 or 3 assessments that you can give to a veteran, and I'll get them to Nate. So if you have a veteran come in here that's showing some symptoms, he can do those assessments with it.
Do they do them in a C box?
No, that's part of our job of expanding this.
Yeah, that's what I just question. I mean, I can see how it relates to here, but then I also think of veterans that I know out of the community.
You're gonna take a donut, take 2.
That I feel like would, really benefit.
Yeah.
Things like this. So that's why I was.
Yeah.
Things.
And by the way, one thing, I'm not a veteran, so there is a question of how do you gain trust, kind of like what Nate was going after. And every time I do an orientation with new veterans coming into the unit, I'll tell my story of going through this disillusionment of divorce, where I thought that was unforgivable because in my tradition, it kind of was. And I tell them, I don't know your trauma, but I know trauma. And I'll be vulnerable with you about mine. So if you want to share with me, and I am amazed at the people who come in and are vindictive about civilians not caring or understanding, don't treat me like that when I'm vulnerable. But that's painful. It's not easy. I don't like my story and I don't like to tell it, but that does create a trust. So.
Yeah, I think your ideas are kind of spot on, actually, as far as